Glowing tracks. My tires left glowing tracks on the road behind me. At first, I thought it was the reflection of the streetlights on the wet asphalt, or some trick of the phosphorescent moss that clung to the roadside. But the glow wasn't fleeting. It lingered, pulsing like it had a heartbeat of its own, and it followed the exact path of my wheels, brightening where the rubber pressed hardest. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I slowed, the car whining as if protesting. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the ribbon of light stretching into the darkness behind me. I had been driving for hours alone, on a stretch of rural highway that seemed to stretch forever, lined with skeletal trees that arched overhead like cathedral ribs. Rain slicked the tarmac, making the faint glow shimmer in the puddles. I flicked the wipers, but they couldn't wash away the sense that the road itself had come alive. The tracks weren't just light, they were deliberate. They twined and swerved in ways my steering hadn't yet forced them to, as though the road remembered me, recorded me, and responded. I tried to reason it away. Maybe a chemical in the asphalt reacted with my tires. Maybe the neon in my tires, those night glow treads, was leaking something I hadn't noticed. But no, the glow intensified when I stopped, hovering above the road like vapor. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, the tracks pulsed, and I could swear they were moving slightly, reaching forward toward me. The first rational thought I had was, "It's following me." I laughed, a brittle, dry sound that scattered against the rain. "Following me," I muttered. "It's just a trick of the wet night." But the laughter caught in my throat when I noticed the reflection in the mirror. The tracks weren't random. They bent, converged, and formed shapes that suggested purpose. A spiral, a triangle, a single, ominous arrow pointing straight at me. I pressed the accelerator, heart hammering. The car leapt forward, tires screaming on the slick pavement. Behind me, the glow thickened, as though absorbing the rain, growing warmer and more radiant. The shapes changed again, this time a series of evenly spaced marks like tallying lines. 5, 6, 7. Each pulse felt like a count toward something inevitable. My stomach sank. I glanced at the odometer. Not much time had passed. I hadn't been driving long enough to leave any track like that. My pulse was a drum in my ears, every sense on high alert. The glow now seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration that rattled my teeth, resonating in the steel of the car frame. It was almost intelligent, sentient, reading me, calculating. I veered off the highway, tires skimming the wet shoulder. The glow followed, spilling into the grass, leaving luminous footprints that clung to the earth. My phone was dead. No signal, no light, only the road, the trees, and the unrelenting tracks. I felt their gaze, some invisible weight pressing against the back of my neck. The glow had become a language I couldn't yet read but understood on a visceral level. I was marked. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Yet no matter how fast I drove, the glow moved faster, bending corners I hadn't turned yet, racing ahead as if it anticipated my escape. The shapes grew more complex, interlocking patterns that pulsed rhythmically, counting down. I realized something was tracking me, using my own motion to mark the seconds, or perhaps the moments remaining. The tally lines had become small, flickering runes etched into the asphalt, each illuminating with quiet menace. I slowed again, hands trembling, breath fogging in the car. I turned on the radio. Static. Only static. In that moment, the patterns coalesced into something I could almost decipher. 3 tall marks, then 1 horizontal. A pause, then 2 more. I didn't recognize the symbols, but I recognized the message. It was counting me. The trees grew denser as the highway narrowed. Fog rolled across the asphalt in thick ribbons, wetting the glow with silver frost. I tried to shake it, weaving left and right, but the glowing tracks never faltered. They mirrored my every maneuver, anticipating, guiding. And with each turn, I noticed a subtle echo of movement behind me. A shape darker than shadow, sliding just beyond the reach of the headlights. It never emerged fully, but it felt patient, inexorably intelligent. its presence a coiled spring ready to snap. A thought, terrifyingly lucid, hit me. This wasn't the glow of my tires. This wasn't mechanical or chemical. I hadn't made the tracks. Something older than me, older than the asphalt, older than the trees, was using the road itself to communicate. Or perhaps to trap me. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding across the damp surface. My headlights caught the glow as it now writhed ahead, forming a perfect circle in the middle of the lane. And inside that circle, I saw it, or thought I did. The faintest outline of a figure, crouched, patient, its head tilting, as though reading me, memorizing my heartbeat. The circle pulsed, sending tremors through my chest. My stomach lurched. This was no longer pursuit. This was observation, instruction, invitation. I tried to reverse, tires spinning uselessly. The glow followed my car like a shadow with its own mind, expanding, encroaching, closing in. The tally marks had become a spiral, spinning inward, pulling my gaze toward its center. Couldn't look away. Each pulse of light matched the rhythm of my heart, and suddenly I realized the spiral wasn't just behind me. It was around me. I was driving in its eye, and it knew it. Panic clawed at me. I gunned the engine, veering sharply onto an old logging road that forked from the highway. The glow didn't scatter. It bent around the trees, following, rewriting itself over the dirt, marking the path as if it existed independently of the tires. And then I noticed something unbearable. At each pulse, each mark, there was an echo, tiny impressions on the wet mud, like footprints, impossibly small but unmistakably human. It was reading the light, reading me, and responding. Counting, always counting. The spirals became a maze, twisting tighter with each mile. My vision narrowed. I couldn't distinguish road from glow from fog. I could feel it now, the weight pressing down, more than observation. It wanted me here, wanted me to follow the lines, to complete the pattern. The idea didn't make sense, but my limbs obeyed anyway, as if the car had its own will, steering into the spirals. I screamed into the night. The figure emerged fully now, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs bending in impossible ways, eyes reflecting every pulse of the glow, reading the rhythm of my breath. My tires left tracks, yes, but I realized, with a sudden, gut-chilling clarity, that the tracks had always existed. I hadn't made them. I had followed them. Every turn, every acceleration, every desperate attempt to escape had been guided by them. The spiral tightened, the marks converging into a single point, right in front of me. My car skidded, a metallic scream against the asphalt. The figure waited there, unmoving yet impossible to ignore. I wanted to reverse, to flee, but my body wouldn't respond. My eyes traced the final track, the final tally line. A single glowing mark that pulsed once. I understood. The light had never been behind me. It had always been in front. The tracks weren't a trace of where I had been. They were instructions for where I was going. And I had followed them, faithfully, blindly, toward whatever lay at the spiral's center. I hit the mark. The world fell away. Not suddenly, but like a slide dissolving into darkness. The headlights blinked out. The glow consumed the car, the road, me. There was no sound except the soft, deliberate pulse of light, counting down, always counting. And then, finally, a whisper in the darkness. Thank you for tracing the path. The tracks, my tracks, flared one last time behind me. And for the first time, I understood the truth. The light was not a follower, not a guide, not a signal. It was a ledger. It recorded lives. And now my name had been added. Legs that bend the wrong way. I was driving alone along the old forest road, the kind that never seems to appear on maps and rarely sees another car. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the asphalt slick and reflective. Mist crept off the tree-line, curling over the wet pavement in ghostly ribbons. My headlights cut through the fog, illuminating the road in pale, trembling beams that seemed to stretch forever. The forest on either side was impossibly dark, the trees towering like silent sentinels. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of motion, leaves trembling, branches snapping, but no animals emerged. Only the wind, or so I told myself. I adjusted the rearview mirror, trying to shake the unease settling behind my ribs, a low hum of tension I couldn't place. Then it appeared. A deer stepped onto the road ahead. Its coat glistened in the wet light, mottled with shadows. I hit the brakes, the tires hissing on the asphalt, and my breath caught. At first glance, it seemed normal. A deer, startled, pausing in the middle of the lane. But then I saw its legs. They bent the wrong way. Not a twitch, not a misstep. The joints curved unnaturally backward, angles that should not exist, as if the deer were folded in on itself like origami. Its movements were fluid, yet wrong, a grotesque mimicry of grace. Each step it took was precise, deliberate, yet defied biology. I wanted to look away, to convince myself it was a trick of shadows or rain-streaked headlights, but my eyes were glued to it. I blinked, and it stopped, head raised, ears twitching, staring directly at me. The gaze wasn't animal, it was too knowing, too deliberate. My stomach clenched. Somewhere deep in my instinct, a primitive warning screamed at me, "Do not follow." But I couldn't stop watching. The deer began to move again, but it didn't run. Instead, it glided along the asphalt, limbs bending in impossible arcs, feet barely touching the wet surface. Each motion seemed to echo some internal rhythm, a choreography I could not understand. I noticed something else. The mist around it shifted unnaturally, curling toward it like smoke drawn to flame. The air smelled damp, sweet, and faintly metallic, like old iron and rainwater mixed. I took a cautious step on the accelerator, hoping the deer would dart away. Didn't. It mirrored my speed, keeping pace as if gauging me, testing boundaries. My pulse was a drum in my ears, loud enough to drown out the distant croak of frogs and the occasional snap of twigs. Then I noticed a subtle pattern in the trees. Shadows that weren't quite shadows, movement just beyond the reach of the headlights. Shapes that mimicked the deer's impossible angles. Branches bending at unnatural joints, roots twisting like limbs. The forest itself seemed to respond to the creature, its energy rippling outward, a silent accompaniment to the unnatural ballet on the road. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was some deformity, a strange mutation, a reflection in the wet asphalt. But the more I observed, the more my mind refused explanation. Its legs weren't broken. They weren't malformed. They were wrong by design, deliberate, purposeful. And the knowledge that some intelligence, ancient, patient, had crafted that wrongness settled in my bones. I reached for the radio. Silence. Static. Not a song. Not a station. Just endless white noise. I tuned the dial, hoping for human voices, any sign that I wasn't alone. But even the static seemed alive, thrumming in time with the deer's movement, like an accompaniment. I passed a bend in the road, and the deer vanished. 1 second, there. The next, gone, though the wet asphalt still shimmered where its impossible hooves had pressed. I exhaled shakily, telling myself it had fled into the trees. But then I noticed something chilling. In the puddles, the reflections didn't match the treeline above. Shapes loomed where no branches existed. Limbs bent backward. Shadows stretched, independent of the objects that should cast them. I realized, with rising dread, that I was being watched not just by the deer, but by the forest itself, or something inhabiting it, feeding off the deer's unnatural choreography. The trees were patient, silent observers, their twisted forms echoing the creature's wrong anatomy, copying it, multiplying it. The road narrowed. Fog thickened. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. And then I saw another deer, or the same one, I couldn't tell, standing ahead, mid-stride. Its head turned toward me, eyes reflective, glimmering with an intelligence I had no name for. Its legs bent backward again. I felt my chest tighten, lungs constricting. I knew I should swerve, accelerate, flee, but my hands felt glued to the wheel. My eyes refused to leave it. It stepped closer, though it didn't move forward in the usual sense. Each step seemed to compress time, folding reality. The forest behind it shivered in synchrony, the fog pulsing outward like the breath of something enormous. I could feel the weight of awareness, a presence that stretched through the mist, through the wet earth, through me. Watching, testing, learning, I turned my gaze to the puddles again. Reflections of deer multiplied, each more grotesque than the last. Some bent more severely, some twisted their torsos in ways impossible to reconcile with muscle and bone. And yet, all of them shared a single coherent intent: to mirror my movements, to track my choices, to anticipate my escape. I pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed, spray of water hitting the windshield. The deer disappeared, but not completely. Its impossible form flickered at the edge of vision, a peripheral shadow that bent and unfolded with the road. My pulse slammed against my ribcage as I realized the road itself had become part of the pattern. Every turn, every puddle, every shadow reflected the unnatural geometry of its legs. Then, at the crest of a small rise, I saw the deer again, standing in the center of the lane. But this time there was something behind it. More of them? No, not quite. Something larger, amorphous, sprawling across the road and tree-line, limbs bending backward in impossible sequences. And then, as I descended toward it, I noticed the final, most unnerving detail. The deer's eyes were not black, not brown. They were mirrors reflecting not my car, not my headlights, but myself, twisted, wrong, incomplete. I slammed the brakes, tires screaming, mist spraying over the hood. My hands trembled uncontrollably. When I glanced at the rearview mirror, the reflection was empty. Just the road, slick and silver. The forest stood still, silent, patient. But in the corner of my vision, a shadow moved independently of light or object, bending its limbs backward, waiting. I tried to drive past it. The deer didn't move, yet the road seemed to shrink around it, forcing me to approach. I could feel it, not just as sight or sound, but in the marrow of my bones, a sense of something older than forests, older than highways, older than myself. It was a sentinel, a vessel, a warning. And as I neared, headlights illuminating the wet asphalt, I realized the last terrifying truth. The deer wasn't alone. It had never been alone. Each step I had taken tonight had been part of a larger, deliberate pattern. Every wrong bend of its legs, every mirrored reflection was a signal, a recording of life performed incorrectly, and now I was part of it. I passed, praying for normalcy. When I looked back, the road was empty. But then I noticed the tracks in the wet asphalt. Hoofprints, elongated and bending backward, stretching further than they could have walked. They trailed into the mist and disappeared. Not because the deer had fled, but because it never needed to. The forest had consumed it, folding its wrongness into the landscape. I drove faster. The trees pressed in, the fog thickened. Every shadow hinted at limbs bent in impossible ways. And somewhere, deep in the mist, I knew the deer was still there, watching, waiting, its geometry replicated in the forest, in the road, in the reflections that no longer obeyed physics. I don't know how far I drove before the fog swallowed the highway entirely. But every time I glimpse a forest road at night, slick with rain, I see them. Legs bending the wrong way, reflections that do not obey the world, and I feel the weight of intelligence, patient and eternal, waiting to correct my mistakes. The deer isn't alone, and neither am I.